Well, hello and welcome to another Sprinkler Talk. My name's Andy. I work for Project Fire. We're based in Staffordshire and we supply products to the automatic fire sprinkler industry. And part of my role here at Project Fire is to do CPDs, to do training. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, then get in touch. These webinars are designed to kind of cover a lot of that, and I hope you find them very useful. So today is episode 16. There's lots of content already on our YouTube channel for you to watch back. So this is episode 16, Residential Sprinklers Part 2. Okay, so if you haven't seen Residential Sprinklers Part 1, then that'll be a good idea for you to watch that. There will be a part 3 as well because I'm still not finished on residential sprinklers. Okay, so let's get going then. So I just wanted to start by showing you this diagram here. So this is something that we talked briefly about in the part 1 of this series of presentations about residential sprinklers. Just kind of pointing out a little bit more detail now. So this is a standalone system. So if you spoke to a sprinkler engineer, this is how ideally we would want it set up. Because for us, sprinklers are really important, and we don't like to be relying on other people's work, essentially. So with a standalone system, we've got all the water we need, and that's in a tank completely separately. It's secure. Nothing can kind of steal the water from us. It's there, it's ready. We don't have to rely on the town main because all the water we need is already in storage. We have our own fire pump, which we test, and again we know that's going to work. It's specifically designed for the job, so the power of the pump has been calculated, to meet the demand and the design of the system. We've got our own valves. We've got our own riser pipes. Everything is completely separate. So, which is, I would suggest, the way that the majority of the automatic fire sprinkler industry world is would ideally like it. And then if you've got a multi-storey building, which is what I'm going to be concentrating on today, sort of multi-storey, large, blocks of flats, large residential premises, then typically, again, what you would do is you would have sort of a different zone on every floor, and this is quite similar to commercial sprinklers under 12845. Where you kind of got quite a simple insulation control valve on the ground floor where you're going to do your flow test and other bits and pieces, and then at each floor you're going to have a zone which comprises of an isolation valve and a flow switch, and there's one of those on each floor so that you can isolate the supply to each floor. In the case of an activation, or in case you want to do any kind of maintenance work or alterations on the floor, you can close that valve off, and you have a flow switch which is giving you fire information. So any sprinkler head operating will cause a flow in water down that pipe leading to the floor, and that will set off the alarm on that flow switch, which will then be passed back to some fire alarm panel or BMS system, or again various ways in which you configure it. But you've got a signal on that floor to say that there's been an activation and therefore a fire, and that can feed into cause and effects. It can feed into evacuation strategies, which I know I've got a lot of publicity due to Grenfell and kind of stay put policies and how to kind of safely evacuate people. But again, that's not for the likes of me, certainly not for the likes of me, and not for the sprinkler industry to kind of decide about evacuation strategies. We just got a signal which can feed into that, and then it's up to others to decide how they use that signal. Also, of course, you'll have your pump running and pump on demand signals as well to tell you that the sprinkler system is active. So, as I say, is this a typical setup? I'm not sure anymore. There are again lots of different ways of doing it, but say for me, this is how we would like it to be done in an ideal world. So let's have a quick look at what it says. This is it, by the way, under 9251, the current version, which is 2014. As we keep kind of mentioning, there is a new one coming out soon. But for the moment, this is it in terms of multi-storey blocks of flats. So it says here that where you've got these multi-storey blocks of flats, the sprinkler alarm device may be configured to serve an alarm zone rather than each dwelling, provided the following conditions are met. Okay, so that's I'm going to kind of stop quite a few times kind of reading this just to point out a few things. So for me, this sentence is saying you've got two options. You either have one sprinkler alarm device per dwelling, per apartment, per flat, whatever you want to call it, or you have one per floor with the following conditions. Okay, having one alarm for the whole building, no, that's not compliant with the code. So you've got a choice of either one per apartment or one per floor. If you're going for one per floor, then you need to follow the following conditions. So no alarm zones you cover more than one single floor. Fair enough. The individual dwelling should be fitted with an LD1 automatic fire detection system with a minimum of grade D power supply. So I'm not an expert on that, but I had a quick Google, and essentially it's a simple kind of standard kind of smoke alarm system, but it's mains powered. And yeah, it's got, it's a similar kind of, it's a very kind of standard design, but it's got to be there. That's the key thing. If I would say if any time that system goes offline or it gets stripped out, then you're not fulfilling this code criteria. So that's something to bear in mind. C, sprinkler alarm device should be connected to a suitable control and indicator equipment so that management are alerted and emergency action plan can be initiated. So, yeah, again, pretty obvious, but you can't just have an alarm device not doing anything. Okay, the alarm device has got to be connected to something which is going to feed into the overall building strategy to make the evacuation of the building safe and according to plan. Then there's a little sentence at the bottom as well. In multi-staircase buildings, the control equipment should clearly indicate the floor level and appropriate staircase. Again, that's an interesting statement, and I think what they are getting at is the fact that if you've got more than one staircase, then you need some information to tell you which staircase is probably most appropriate to use. So for me, that would probably mean having two zones per floor to kind of say, well, is the fire on the left-hand side of the building or the right-hand side of the building? And that would make an impact in terms of, okay, which staircase is most likely to be the one that's most appropriate for people to evacuate to. As I say, it's just one sentence, it just something to bear in mind, and say maybe to kind of pass up the chain in terms of if you are dealing with a multi-staircase residential building, just kind of flagging up that statement and asking for more information. Examples of residential flow switches then. So here's a few on the screen. So this is the kind of thing that you would find on each floor if you've got a multi-storey building, or it's the sort of thing that you would find sort of one of in an individual dwelling, just so kind of one of them, or one per floor. But so we're talking about multi-storey residential buildings here. So as I say, there's a few options there. We've got the flow switch on its own. which is shown there, or you've got various designs which incorporate a pressure gauge and some kind of test connection and some kind of isolation valve as well. So various options all do quite a similar thing. One of the things with residential systems under 9251 is approvals. So under 12845, and certainly if you're doing it to LPS 1048 or FireAS, etc., then things have a need to be approved products. Say typically LPCV. Under 9251, that's not required. So you'll have a choice really. Some products will be approved and some won't. So the flow switches on their own, for example, are approved. That the valves, etc., may not be, but it's just something to bear in mind. Approved products are always better. Come on, computer. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so here are a couple of products which we sell. So Project Fire products. So these are residential zone checks. So here we have the flow switch incorporated. We have our pressure gauge. And we have our bypass line with pump. So this is a way of testing the flow switch using this kind of circulating system rather than discharging water. We still have a drain, of course, because if we want to drain the water out of the floor, then we're still going to need one of those. And on the right-hand side, you can see a full bore drain. The one on the left is obscure, but that's a smaller drain. And I'll explain, why we made that. Well, it's not a change, it's not a product change, but we have that option in our product range. I'll explain that a bit later. So that one is designed for risers, so that will be installed vertically. And then we also, on the right-hand side, we have one which is designed for voids. So it's kind of as flat as possible to go into the ceiling void. And then the one on the left is a galvanized unit. So yeah, again, we've got various options for residential buildings where you can do automated flow switch testing. That's like a little cutaway version. And that's just showing this kind of idea of circulating the water. So we simply suck water out from beyond the flow switch, pump it in to the pipework before, and that creates this circle of water where we're actually testing the flow switch using water under the correct conditions, which is one head in operation, and we're activating the paddle and checking that the flow switch is working correctly. The residential zone checks can be controlled in 3 different methods. So we have the mini switch option, which is the cheapest option. So all that does is just runs the pump. So it's like a manual switch. Turn it on, turn the pump on, turn it off. So you'd need somebody to kind of make sure that the signal's actually getting through with that one. The key switch is the same key switch that we use on our commercial zone checks. And that has some lights on the front, which gives you a little bit of feedback in terms of is the pump running, and tells you when the test has been successful. They can also be grouped together in groups of up to 25, so you can do multiple testing at once. Or we have our addressable system, which means that you can test all of the flow switches in a building through one controller unit. And that system will also monitor the isolation valves on the floor as well, if they are compatible. I.e., they are compatible with any monitored valve. But what I should have said was, if the valves that are used are monitored valves, then they can be taken onto our system as well. So, say 3 different control options for our residential zone checks. Do get in touch if you want to know any more. This one here is a semi-combined system. So we are looking at a shared tank and a shared pump. And we have a separate riser. This one is the same, but we have a different pump. So you can see that the 2 there, we've got 1 tank and 1 pump, and we've got 1 tank and 2 pumps where you have a separate sprinkler pump. So again, those are 2 different ways of doing it. Some people have said that they actually prefer to have a shared pump for the domestic and the sprinklers on the basis that that pump is running all the time. So it's basically constantly being tested. Every time someone turns the tap, has a shower, flushes the toilet, that pump is active. And so it's kind of being used all the time, whereas of course the sprinkler pump is mostly doing nothing in its lifetime. And also, if the pump fails, then you're going to have residents kind of complaining and telling you that the pumps fail pretty quick. I take those points on board for sure. But obviously, any failure of that pump is going to knock out the sprinklers as well. This one is a fully combined system. What I should have done actually put some labels on here because we have priority demand valves on each floor level. You don't necessarily need one on each floor level. You could just have one at the bottom. It just depends on whether you have a shared riser or not. If you've got a riser which is a combined riser, as you can see that's for the domestic supply and the sprinklers, then you're going to need a priority demand valve on each floor. So what that does is that when the sprinklers operate, those priority demand valves will close, and that will mean that people can't use the domestic water whilst the sprinklers are activating. And that just ensures that all of the water is available for the sprinklers, and it means that the pump is just doing basically one job at a time. It is supplying the water for the sprinklers. So just to run over that again, because that might have been a bit quick. So when the sprinkler heads operate, the water come out of the head, let's say on floor 2. The flow switch on floor 2 will activate and say that there's an activation, there's a fire, and at that point various panels and boxes will talk to each other, and the priority demand valves on all the floors will shut off, which will mean that nobody can open the tap, flush the toilet, put the washing machine on, dishwasher, etc., because all of the water is now solely being used for the sprinklers, which is good because it just means that water is guaranteed for sprinkler use. What it does mean, that this kind of combined arrangement, is that effectively you've got a sprinkler system on each floor, because that's where the sprinkler system starts. The start is at each floor. It's a bit like you've got a town main system. So you've got like the town main, although it's kind of running vertically, if you imagine it running sort of down the street, and each floor being a separate building on the street, it's a bit like that for me. So the start of the sprinkler system is kind of on each floor level. And the reason I bring that up is because that was what was kind of pointed out to us at Project Fire when we first released our residential zone check with a small bore drain. They said, our customers said, well, we want to use it on a combined system, and therefore we need a full bore drain. The difference being is that the small drain is fine for draining the water out of the floor level, but you need a full bore drain in order to do a full flow test, which is generally done over by the pump and the tank. But in this instance, it would have to be done on each floor level. So that's something to bear in mind, is that the kind of testing and maintenance schedule for a fully combined system is greater than if you have a sort of semi-combined or standalone system. So as we discussed earlier from the text, you've got options. You can either have one flow switch or one sprinkler alarm device per apartment, or you can have one per floor. Now, the vast majority of cases will have one per floor, but I just think that we need to understand that there is a choice here, and having one per apartment does bring some advantages. Obviously, that there is a cost implication. But if these flats are being sold for like £1 million each, which often they are in London, in these kind of prestigious residential buildings, then there's plenty of money to be spent. Often people aren't in. Again, that's I am sort of talking London here, but I'm sure it would apply to all kind of major cities where you've got a block of flats, and residents, I don't know, one in four, 1 in 3 aren't going to be there because it's like maybe a second home for them. They just use it to kind of when they're working in the city. The rest of the time they're not there. So if you have a sprinkler activation, so maybe there's I guess if there's a fire, then water damage, you don't really care about it because you need to tackle the fire. But if there isn't a fire, if there has been a leak, a sort of major leak or a malfunction or some damaged sprinkler heads, if they're activating, there'll be an alarm for the floor, but you won't know which particular apartment the activation is coming from. So is there facilities management on site? Maybe not. If there is, what they're going to do, they're going to start knocking on doors, say, have you got water coming out of your sprinkler heads? No. What about you? No. Knock, knock. No one there. It could cause a lot of damage quite quickly. So having one flow switch per apartment does give you more information, does give you more peace of mind that any activation, you're going to know exactly where that is coming from. And obviously that can feed into the evacuation strategy as well. So again, the more information you've got, the more detailed an evacuation plan you could make. Again, with these kind of panels and little boxes to kind of speak to you and give you instructions, all of that will benefit from having more information. The more alarm devices you've got, the more testing you need to do, but the harder it is to do that testing because you'll have to go down the corridor and do this kind of discharging water into buckets, or you're actually going to have to get access to the apartments to actually drain water. So all that will be a hassle, unless, of course, you install our Zonecheck products, where you can do that testing remotely without causing any disruption and without discharging any water. So again, just need to bear that in mind, is that there is a choice here between one per floor or one per apartment. It's not an automatic thing to have just one flow switch per floor. Okay, let's talk now about inspection and testing. So this is under 9251. I like this little statement there, which is shown in the top right-hand corner, which is part of the standard. It says, sprinkler system maintenance is not complex, but is essential. It is important that owners and occupiers are provided with adequate information. Yes, absolutely agree with that statement. Again, it's not difficult, but it is really important to do. And information is key to owners and occupiers. A, informing them that they've got to do it, and B, just informing them, what have they got? Making sure that they understand, what impact closing that valve will have. This is your sprinkler fire pump. This is your tank. This is where the flow switch is. These are the valves. Just understanding a little bit about what it is and what it does, so that if they've got any concerns, they can sort of report that through, and they're confident of what it's going to do. So let's go through what is required. This is an annual test on a minimum. So I need to point that out, a minimum of an annual test by a competent person. All components are functioning as designed. I like that one. It's kind of a catch-all, isn't it? Is everything working? Obviously the pump, obviously the alarm devices, also the valves, and anything else that you've got on there, any monitoring equipment, any panels, is everything working as designed? B, check for leaks. C, check for any modifications. of either the building or the sprinkler system or both, just to make sure that everything is still in full compliance. Assessment of impact of any building changes. So have there been an extension? Have they changed the use of one of the buildings? Is one of the buildings now suddenly a games room or a laundry room or a conference room or a cafe? What have they done to the building which may affect the sprinklers? Checking the sprinkler heads. We've been through that in a previous presentation. Checking for damage, checking for paint, checking for sort of corrosion, any other issues with the sprinkler heads, checking that they're not blocked or obscured. Exercise the valves and locking mechanisms. Check system flow rate and pressure against calculated figures. So that's the test I was talking about, this kind of full flow test. So generally speaking, that is at the fire pump. If your fire pump is delivering the specified flow rate at the specified pressure, then everything else should be good because it's all based on that design. Alarms functioning as designed. Again, that might be simple, that might be quite complex, depending on what kind of building you've got and how many panels and wires and signals you've got. Backflow prevention devices serviced as required. It might be a case that no service is required, but that's just something to look into. So often that will be the kind of float valves on the tank, making sure that that they are still doing what they're supposed to do. Check monitoring arrangements. Again, kind of covered that already, and any trace heating check. So again, absolutely not complex, is essential. Just comparing that now to 1695, I missed out the EN there, so that's a PSEN 1695 in 2018. Again, minimum program. It's another annual inspection, but as a minimum. Very similar. I'm not going to go through it all, but you can see that it's a very similar setup to the 9251. They specifically talk about an automatic pump start, but that will be done under 9251 as well. They talk about having a spares box. I'm not sure 9251 sort of insists on having a spares box, whereas 1695 does. That was a good statement I found there. The user shall notify all parties of interest of the intent to carry out tests and or shut down of the sprinkler system. Again, for residential buildings, there should be some communication with the residents. You could argue if you're doing testing and there are going to be no alarms being sounded, then maybe you don't need to inform them. But I always think it'd be a good idea. Maybe something goes wrong. Maybe you thought you were going to isolate an alarm, but in the end you didn't, and so an alarm is sounded. It's just good to keep people informed, and particularly if the sprinkler system is off, then they definitely need to be informed because they are relying on that sprinkler system for purposes of life safety. So if that sprinkler system is off, then they are at more risk than they were before. Also, interestingly, under 1695, there is a 25-year inspection which is required, similar to 12845, Annex K and TB203, in terms of flushing, internal pipe inspection, and testing of a sample of sprinkler heads. That's in there as well. Okay, coming towards the end now. So this is just a case of coming soon. So I'm just kind of noting that this is as much for me really as it is for you to kind of remind myself that these are some of the topics that I haven't covered yet. So CPVC pipe, in terms of how it's constructed, how it is put together, how it is tested and checked. More information on residential sprinkler heads. Monitoring of zone valves, we'll go into a little bit more detail. Looking at the issues of mixed-use residential buildings. So that's a big topic really. Mixed-use residential is very commonplace. to have some commercial areas, a few shops, maybe a hairdresser's on the ground floor of your residential building. Say it is very common, but in terms of codes, there's still not all that much information out there in terms of what exactly you need to do. So I'll be giving my opinion and giving you the information that is out there on that topic. Retrofitting of sprinklers, we haven't talked about that yet. Frictional losses in pipe work, again I'll give some examples of that. And then when I went through the layout of sprinkler heads, I said I'd give you an example of how heads would be laid out in a residential manner. Essentially, it's kind of the same thing, but just that the method you do it, for me, is quite different if you've got lots of small rooms than if you have one large room. So yeah, I'll go through that, and I'll talk a little bit about shadow areas, which sounds very exciting, doesn't it? So yeah, I'll tell you what they are and what that means. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. So next week we're looking at water storage tanks, what the different options are in terms of materials and construction, and inspections that are required in terms of cleaning it and having a look inside. So yeah, next week, water storage tanks. As always, do send emails to sprinklertalk@projectfire.co.uk. If you have any questions or comments or topics that you'd like me to cover, then please do get in touch. All right, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.